The city glowed softly that evening. Neon signs flickered above busy shops, while the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted meat drifted from the restaurants that lined the street. Inside one of those restaurants, warmth filled the air. Families laughed over steaming bowls of soup, friends clinked their glasses, and the sound of plates meeting tables created a comforting rhythm. It was a place where people gathered to forget their troubles and celebrate life. But just beyond the glass door, another world existed. A boy stood there, motionless, almost blending into the shadows. His hair was unkempt, his clothes torn and caked with dust. His tiny hands, trembling from the cold, pressed against the glass as he peered inside. His name was Daniel. To the people walking past, he was just another homeless child, one of the many faces they'd grown used to ignoring. But Daniel carried a story that none of them knew. For weeks, he had been wandering the streets, sleeping on hard pavements, begging for scraps no one wanted to give. His parents were long gone, swallowed by a fate too cruel for a boy so young to understand. And now, at only 10 years old, the city had become both his home and his enemy. Each night was the same. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, loneliness wrapped around his fragile heart, and rejection stung sharper than the winter wind. People would glance at him, some with pity, most with disgust, as though his very existence was an inconvenience. The world had given him no reason to hope, and yet tonight, something pulled him toward that brightly lit restaurant. Inside, the sound of laughter and the sight of food felt like paradise to his starving eyes. He could almost taste the warm bread, almost hear what it might feel like to belong at one of those tables. For minutes he hesitated. What if they chased him away again? What if the people mocked him, just as others always had? But hunger is a cruel master. It drowns out fear, silences shame, and forces even the most broken soul to take a step forward. And so, Daniel reached for the handle. His breath caught in his chest. His heart pounded as if warning him to stop. With trembling fingers, he pushed the door open. The chatter inside faded for a second as the cold wind followed him in. Heads began to turn. That night, Daniel dared to step into the restaurant. But what happened inside left everyone frozen in silence. The restaurant's warmth should have comforted him. Instead, it made Daniel feel even smaller. As the door swung shut behind him, the laughter that had once echoed so loudly seemed to stumble, breaking into uneasy silence. Forks paused midair. Conversations trailed off. One by one, eyes turned toward the boy in ragged clothes, a stranger who didn't belong in their world of polished tables and sparkling glasses. For a moment, Daniel froze. His bare feet shifted against the tiled floor, and he lowered his gaze, as though wishing he could melt into the ground. He had entered places before, markets, shops, even alleys where food smells teased him, but this time was different. The stares pierced deeper, sharper, until his little chest rose and fell with nervous breaths. A waiter, tall and stiff in his white uniform, frowned and stepped forward. The tray in his hand tilted, almost spilling, as if Daniel's presence had already disturbed the evening. He leaned toward a colleague, whispering sharply, "What is he doing here?" The other waiter only shrugged, glancing at the boy with visible irritation. The whispers spread like ripples on water. Is he lost? Why would they let him in? He'll spoil people's appetite. Mothers pulled their children closer, as if Daniel carried a disease. A few young men chuckled quietly, mocking his torn shirt and dirt-stained face. To them, he was an intruder, an uninvited reminder of the world outside their comfort. Then the manager appeared, a tall man with neatly combed hair and a dark suit. His polished shoes clicked against the floor as he approached Daniel. His face bore the kind of forced smile reserved for customers, but his eyes held no warmth. Crossing his arms, he looked down at the boy. "Son," the manager began, voice firm but cold, "this is not the place for you. Please step outside." Daniel's throat tightened. His lips parted, but for a moment, no words came. He glanced at the steaming plates nearby, the untouched breadbasket, the bowls of soup releasing gentle clouds of warmth. His stomach growled, loud enough for those closest to hear. Finally, he whispered, "Please, sir, I'm not asking for money, just a little food." The words hung in the air, fragile, yet heavy. They cut through the chatter, silencing even the whispers. The manager blinked, startled by the boy's request. He had expected excuses, lies, maybe even a cry for coins. But this was different, simple, innocent, almost too honest. A woman near the corner table gasped softly, covering her mouth. An older man frowned, shaking his head as if pity had no place in such a setting. The group of young men who had mocked Daniel moments ago grew quiet, their laughter fading into awkwardness. Reactions collided: curiosity, annoyance, discomfort. "Why bring this to us?" muttered a man in a suit. "He's just a child," whispered another. One mother's eyes welled with tears as she held her daughter closer, suddenly imagining what it would feel like if her own child stood there, begging not for money but for food. The manager cleared his throat, his patience thinning. "This is a restaurant, not a charity," he said, louder this time, his voice carrying across the room. "You need to leave. Now." Daniel's shoulders sank, but he did not step back. His small fingers clutched at his shirt as he gathered courage to speak again. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. "I haven't eaten in 2 days, please. Just one plate." The silence deepened. Even the clinking of dishes stopped. For a heartbeat, the entire restaurant seemed suspended between rejection and compassion. Everyone watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence inside the restaurant stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. All eyes remained fixed on the boy standing near the entrance, his small figure trembling under the weight of judgment. The manager's jaw tightened as he took a step closer, towering over him. "Son," the man repeated more firmly this time, "I said you need to leave. This is no place for you." Daniel's lips quivered. He opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the narrator's voice pulled us somewhere else, back in time, into the painful shadows of his past. Daniel hadn't always been this way, hungry, homeless, invisible. There was a time when he had a family, a mother whose smile felt warmer than the sun, and a father whose laughter filled their tiny home with life. But that world collapsed when sickness took his mother away. His father remarried soon after, desperate for companionship. The woman who came into their lives was strict, sharp-tongued, and never saw Daniel as her own. When Daniel's father passed suddenly in an accident, the stepmother's cruelty knew no limits. Her hands, once pretending to guide him, became hands that shoved him away. Her voice, once pretending to care, turned into insults that pierced his little heart. "You're nothing but a burden," she would say. "No wonder no one wants you." Nights grew longer. Meals became fewer. And when she finally locked him out one evening, leaving him to sleep on the porch like a stray dog, Daniel understood the truth. He had no home anymore. So he ran. Ran from the house, from the cruelty, from the memories that stabbed deeper than hunger. He wandered the streets searching for food in trash bins, sleeping wherever darkness allowed. Each day blurred into the next, a cycle of rejection and survival. But through it all he clung to one thing, a small, worn photograph of his mother. The edges were frayed, the colors fading, but the smile on her face remained. Whenever loneliness crushed him, Daniel would pull out that picture, tracing her face with trembling fingers, whispering to himself, "One day, Mama, I'll be safe again." And now, in the restaurant, with dozens of strangers staring at him like an intruder, Daniel's hand reached instinctively into his pocket. Slowly he pulled out that fragile photograph, holding it close to his chest as if the memory of his mother might shield him from the coldness surrounding him. The manager noticed and frowned. "What's that? A trick?" "Put it away." Daniel shook his head quickly. His voice cracked as he answered, It's my mother. She's gone. This is all I have left." The words sliced through the room like a whisper of truth no one wanted to hear. A few customers shifted uneasily in their seats. The mother who had earlier clutched her child now wiped at her eyes, unable to stop herself from imagining the pain of such loss. But the manager's face remained hard. He wasn't moved, or perhaps he refused to show it. "I'm sorry," he said coldly, "but pity doesn't buy food. This is a business, not a shelter." Daniel's eyes welled, though he tried to keep the tears from falling. He clutched the photograph tighter as if it might give him the strength to stay standing. His voice trembled, but he forced himself to speak once more. "I don't want money, I don't want charity. I just want to feel what it's like to eat like everyone else. Just once. Please." His words carried the weight of every night. He had shivered in the cold every time his stomach had screamed for food, every insult and rejection he had endured. The restaurant was divided. Some customers turned away, embarrassed by their own comfort. Others whispered, debating if someone should help. A young man near the corner tapped his fingers against the table nervously, while an elderly woman shook her head with quiet disapproval at the manager's harshness. No one dared to break the invisible line between them and the boy who stood at the center of it all, clutching his mother's photograph like a shield against a world that had long abandoned him. The tension grew heavier, pressing on every heart in the room. The question hung in the air, unspoken yet deafening. Would anyone have the courage to step forward? The boy's trembling voice lingered in the air, heavier than the scent of food, sharper than the whispers that had filled the room only moments before. He stood clutching his mother's photograph, waiting, hoping. But no one moved. The manager shifted uncomfortably, tapping his fingers against the counter as though the boy's very presence was an inconvenience he wanted to erase. "Enough," he muttered. "This is not the place for—" And then a voice cut through the silence. Wait. It was soft, weathered, but carried the weight of years. Heads turned toward the corner table where an elderly man slowly rose to his feet. His hands were wrinkled, his shoulders stooped, yet his gaze was steady, firm. The old man walked forward, each step deliberate, until he stood before the boy. For a moment, he simply looked at him, not with pity, not with annoyance, but with the kind of recognition that only comes from pain once lived. "What's your name, child?" the man asked gently. Daniel lifted his eyes, unsure if he should answer. His voice came as a whisper, almost afraid to be heard. "Daniel." The old man nodded. "Daniel," he repeated, as though memorizing it. Then, to everyone's shock, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and turned toward the manager. "This boy will sit with me." The room froze. The waiters exchanged startled glances, the manager blinked in disbelief, and the customers murmured in confusion. Never before had someone challenged the unspoken rule that boys like Daniel belonged outside, invisible. The manager hesitated. "Sir, with respect, I don't think—" "I said," the old man interrupted firmly, "bring him a plate, the same as mine, and make it hot." The weight of his command silenced even the manager. Daniel's heart raced. For a moment, he wondered if he had heard wrong. But then the old man guided him gently toward his table. A chair was pulled out. For the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel sat at a table not of stone or pavement, but one draped with a clean cloth, surrounded by silver cutlery and warm lights. The restaurant's chatter had vanished completely. Forks lay abandoned, conversations suspended. All that remained was silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence heavy with meaning. Some felt guilt. Guilt for the times they had walked past children like him, pretending not to notice. Guilt for their laughter tonight, knowing just outside the door a boy had been starving. Others felt compassion stir quietly, a voice inside whispering that kindness should never be so rare. And still others wrestled with discomfort, their reflection staring back at them in ways they didn't want to see. Because in Daniel's eyes they saw not just a boredom, they saw themselves, and how easy it was to ignore what made them human. The old man said nothing more. He didn't need to. His action spoke louder than any sermon, louder than any lecture. And so Daniel sat, small and nervous, clutching his mother's photograph in one hand, the other resting on the table before him. The room remained in stunned quiet, all waiting for what would happen next. Because the silence wasn't just about the boy anymore. It was about what the silence revealed in every heart present that night. Daniel's hands trembled as the plate was set before him. Steam rose from the rice and the aroma filled his senses. For the first time in days, his hunger wasn't just a dull ache. It was about to be satisfied. He picked up the spoon cautiously, almost afraid that someone might snatch it away, but no one did. The old man sat across from him quietly watching, not with suspicion but with patience. His eyes carried no judgment, only a silent invitation. Eat. You are safe here. Daniel began to eat, slowly at first, then faster, as if every bite was a race against time, against hunger, against the possibility that this moment might disappear. Around them, the restaurant remained still, every eye drawn to the fragile boy devouring food with the desperation of someone who had gone too long without it. After a while, the old man finally spoke. "How long has it been, child?" he asked, softly. Daniel paused, his spoon frozen midway. He didn't look up. I don't know," he murmured. "Some days I forget. Some days I pretend I already ate just so it doesn't hurt." The old man's heart ached, but he didn't interrupt. Instead, he leaned forward. "Where are your parents, Daniel?" Silence. The boy set the spoon down. His small fingers curled tighter around the photograph lying on the table. The edges were torn. The image faded. But the face of a woman still smiled faintly from it. "My mother," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. She never came back." The old man's brows furrowed. "Never came back?" Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "She left one morning to look for work. She promised she'd bring bread. I waited all day. I waited the next day. And the day after. But she never came back." His eyes glistened as he clutched the picture closer. "I searched the streets. I asked people. No one had seen her. I don't even know if she's—" His voice faded into silence. The restaurant air grew heavier, as if every person there was holding their breath. "And your father?" the old man pressed gently. Daniel shook his head. "I never knew him. Mama said he was gone before I could walk. She never told me where or why. It was just the two of us, always just us." A murmur ran through the room. Customers shifted uncomfortably, some wiping at their eyes, others staring at the table as guilt gnawed at them. This was no thief, no beggar. This was a child carrying the weight of a broken world on his small shoulders. The old man's voice lowered, almost trembling. "And after your mother disappeared?" Daniel swallowed hard. "At first I stayed near our room. I thought she would come back. But when the landlord locked the door and threw our things out, I had nowhere to go. I slept outside. I tried the orphanage once, but—" His voice cracked. "They were cruel. They beat me when I cried at night. So I ran. I've been running ever since." A single tear rolled down his cheek, dropping onto the table. "Sometimes I dream that Mama will walk through the crowd and call my name. But when I wake up, it's always just me." The boy's words fell like stones into the hearts of everyone listening. The clinking of cutlery had stopped. Even the waiters who had once frowned at him now stood with lowered eyes. The old man exhaled slowly, his chest tight with emotions he could no longer hide. There was something in Daniel's story that struck too close to home. Something buried, deep in his own past, that now clawed its way back to the surface. He leaned closer, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "Daniel, may I see that photograph of your mother?" The boy hesitated, then slid the worn picture across the table. The old man picked it up carefully, his hands shaking as his eyes fell on the faded smile of the woman in the photo. And then he froze. His breath caught in his throat. His lips parted, but no words came. For in that instant he realized there was something about this boy, something about the woman in the picture, that connected their lives in a way no one in that restaurant could have ever imagined. The old man's hand trembled as he held the faded photograph closer. His eyes searched every line of the woman's face, every curve of her smile. For a moment the noise of the world seemed to vanish. There was only him, the picture, and the boy staring back at him with wide, uncertain eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, as though dragged out from years of silence. Her name. What was her name, child? Daniel swallowed hard. Elena, he whispered. Elena was my mother. The old man's knees nearly buckled. He lowered himself back into his chair, pressing a trembling hand to his mouth. The room leaned in, every soul straining to catch his next words. Elena, he repeated, tears glistening in his eyes. I knew her. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Daniel blinked in shock. You knew my mother? The old man nodded slowly. Many years ago. She was like a sister to me. Your father. He stopped suddenly, his throat tightening. The boy leaned forward, desperate. Please. Do you know my father? The restaurant was so silent now that even the ticking of the wall clock sounded loud. Forks were motionless, breaths shallow, hearts pounding in sync with the boy's plea. The old man closed his eyes, and for a long moment, he seemed to wrestle with a storm inside him. When he opened them again, tears streamed freely down his weathered cheeks. Daniel, he whispered, your father was my closest friend. We grew up together, worked together. He was like a brother to me. The boy's lips parted, trembling. Then where is he? Why did he leave us? The old man's voice cracked. He didn't leave you. He didn't even know you existed. He disappeared before you were born. We searched, but... His words broke apart, hanging heavy in the air. Gasps and murmurs filled the room, but no one dared interrupt. The revelation had transformed this dinner scene into something sacred, something eternal. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. So, you mean, you knew my father? I didn't just know him, the old man said, his voice fierce despite the tremor. I loved him like my own blood, and seeing you here, Daniel. He paused, overcome by emotion. You look exactly like him. The same eyes, the boy covered his face with his hands as sobs broke free. His small shoulders shook violently, releasing years of loneliness and unanswered questions. For the first time, someone was telling him that his father had been real, that his story was not empty shadows. Customers who had once whispered in judgment now wiped their eyes openly. Even the manager who had been so harsh moments ago stood frozen in shame, unable to meet the boy's gaze. The old man leaned forward and gently placed his wrinkled hand on Daniel's trembling ones. Child, you are not alone anymore. Do you hear me? You are not forgotten. You are the son of a man who mattered, and you matter too. Daniel's tears spilled freely, his lips quivering as he whispered, I thought no one would ever know me, that no one would ever remember her or him, that I would just disappear. The old man shook his head firmly, his own tears falling onto the table. No, Daniel, not anymore. As long as I live, you will never disappear. You carry their blood, their memory, their spirit. And now, I will carry you. The room erupted into hushed sobs. Grown men bowed their heads. Women covered their mouths in shock. No one touched their food. No one shifted in their seats. It was as though time itself had paused to honor this reunion of truths. And yet, beneath the emotion, a new tension quietly formed, a question heavy, in the air. If the old man knew Daniel's father and Daniel's mother was missing, what more did he know? The truth had begun to surface, but there was still more hidden beneath, truths that could change everything about Daniel's life. Daniel wiped his tears with the back of his hand, his chest still heaving from the storm of emotions. Across the table, the old man studied him with eyes that no longer carried just curiosity. They carried responsibility. Slowly, he reached across and held the boy's fragile hand in his own. Daniel, he said softly, no child should Walk this world alone? Tonight that ends for you." The boy blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. What do you mean?" The old man's voice trembled, but it was steady with resolve. "I cannot replace your mother. I cannot bring back your father. But I can promise you this. You will not return to the streets tonight. From this moment on, you are not abandoned. I will help you. I will protect you. I will make sure you are safe." Daniel stared at him, stunned. His lips parted, but no sound came. Then slowly, his tears returned. Not of sorrow this time, but of relief. For the first time, the world did not feel like an enemy. The restaurant, which had witnessed his shame, his hunger, his pain, now became witness to something far greater: the birth of hope. Some customers lowered their eyes, ashamed that it had taken one man's courage to do what they themselves had been too afraid to attempt. Others whispered prayers under their breath, promising silently that they too would never ignore such a moment again. The manager, once stern and unfeeling, approached hesitantly. He cleared his throat, his voice awkward yet sincere. "Sir, the boy's meals from tonight forward will be on the house." His gaze dropped to the floor. "Forgive me, Daniel." Daniel didn't answer, but his small nod was enough. The old man rose to his feet, guiding Daniel up with him. Together they walked toward the door, not as a stranger and a beggar, but as something closer to family. And as they stepped into the night air, the silence inside the restaurant was no longer heavy with guilt. It had transformed into something different, a silence of reflection, a silence that asked every soul present a single question. What would the world look like if kindness was not the exception, but the rule? The boy clutched his photograph one last time, but his grip was no longer desperate. For though the picture reminded him of what he had lost, the hand holding his reminded him of what he had just gained: a future. And so, with a heart lighter than it had been in years, Daniel walked into the night, not as a forgotten child, but as a boy who had finally been seen. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is one act of courage and one act of kindness. The night closed gently around them as Daniel and the old man stepped away from the restaurant. Behind them, silence lingered, not of judgment anymore, but of reflection. Every person seated inside knew they had witnessed something rare, something powerful. But the question remained, echoing louder than any applause could. What if no one had spoken up for him? What if the old man had stayed silent like everyone else? What if Daniel had been pushed out once again, left to vanish into the streets, hungry, forgotten, invisible? The truth is, it happens every day. Children walk among us in shadows and alleys and markets, waiting for someone to see them, waiting for someone to care. Most people look away. Most people pretend not to notice. But tonight, one man changed everything with a single choice. So, I ask you, what would you do if a hungry child walked into your favorite restaurant? Would you look away? Or would you be the voice, the hand, the heart that says, "Sit, eat, you matter"? Because the measure of humanity is not in how we treat the powerful, but in how we treat the forgotten. Yet even as hope filled Daniel's heart, another shadow lingered, a question left unanswered: the photograph of his mother, the memory of a father he never knew, and the way the old man's face had changed when he saw that picture. Could it be that somewhere Daniel's father was still alive? And if so, why had he never returned? The answers, perhaps, still wait in the chapters ahead. For now, remember this: sometimes one act of courage can change a moment, and sometimes it can change a life forever. If this story moved you, if Daniel's journey touched your heart, then don't let it end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were there that night? Hit the like button if you believe kindness has the power to rewrite destinies. And most importantly, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in Daniel's story.